Well, the time has finally come to give this old wreck a new lease in life. This used to be the Mustang Chicken Coupe. If anybody has looked at the blog posts from probably 3 years ago, 2020, yeah. This thing was half smashed by a tree, and rather than scrap it, it became a chicken coop for a good while. Well, as time would have it, things rust even more, Mustangs rust even more, and it has fallen into such a state of disrepair that rather than keep trying to patch up on something that the chickens really ain't using much anymore, I figured it'd be cool to turn this thing back into a bona fide car again. But of course, if you already have seen what we've done before, being a Mustang, it's going to become another Truckstang, Truckstang 2 to be exact. I have an S10 frame, which single cab short bed S10 frames, just like Ranger frames, have the same wheelbase as that Mustang right there. Well, the 65 through 73. So this body's going to go on that S10 frame. And unlike the first Truckstang that went on a earlier generation Ranger frame, we actually have the advantage of having the upper lower control arm suspension instead of the double wishbone cross. I don't know what the hell they call that weird suspension that Ford used on their earlier trucks, but because we have upper and lower control arms on the S10 frame, we would at least be able to get this thing to where it could sit a little bit lower than Truckstang 1 has. And in the worst case, there are aftermarket drop spindles that could be installed to lower the front a little bit. So that's neither here or there. The biggest thing is this car needs to be moved from out of the chicken yard and to a suitable staging area where we can actually perform all the work. In the meantime, though, I do have to lighten the load a little bit to at least get a head start. It means the hood's got to come off, doors need to come off. Really need to examine the rest of the front area here, because I really need to take the fenders and the front clip, all that garbage off, so when we go to lift this thing up, it won't be as heavy. Another thing is cutting out all the old floors and everything that I welded in place to turn this thing into a chicken coop. So there's sheet metal and conduits in the engine bay as well as the cab area that have to be removed, along with some plumbing and electrical lines that were installed as part of the chicken coop. Everything's gotta go, so might as well go ahead and get started on pulling some panels off. So stand by. Managed to get the doors, the hood, fenders, front grille, front balance panel all removed. So off to a good little start. Next thing I'm going to start doing is using the impact wrench to start knocking out all the self-tapping screws that I use to hold a lot of this sheet metal in place, since that'll be a little bit easier to do than just coming in here with the grinders and chopping stuff out. So little by little, I'm going to keep breaking all this stuff down so we can get this thing stripped down as much as possible before we go to move it. So work continues. All right, with a little bit of tractor pulling and pushing, we managed to get our stripped down Mustang Hulk in position where we need it to be. As you can see, the S10 frame is sitting right back there. It'll be ready to roll up under this thing when we get this thing on drums and boards. So at this rate, now I gotta start pulling all the undercarriage off of this thing so I can get it up on the drums and boards. So the work continues. Removing the coil springs is kind of troublesome because it requires the use of a compressor tool. Now, because of the shock still being in the middle, I'm stuck with using the two-piece compressor that's normally used for struts. Now, as we could obviously attest to, these things might not compress the coil enough to be able to remove it. So in our case here, I had to remove the upper ball joint so I could get enough play in the upper control arm to where I could then just pry the top of the coil spring out altogether to get it safely out while under compression, of course, so I could safely remove the tools. Then, after removing all of the suspension components, the upper lower control arms, the connections to the sway bar and stabilizer struts, all that, going to the other side, I took a different approach. I just immediately removed the upper ball joint and the nuts holding the upper control arm in place. Then with a little bit of tapping on those bolts sticking out, I was able to just make the whole upper control arm and coil spring pop out in one piece. It was actually a rather safe thing to do because the shock held the coil spring from just flying out uncontrollably. That then leads me to getting the cross members out. There's two of them that have to come out. One that holds the stabilizer struts in the front, that has to come out. And there's also the cross member that holds the shock towers apart, as well as holds the motor mount brackets and helps hold all of the suspension garbage that we had to pull out. Just like with Truckstang 1, we had to cut all that stuff out because more than likely we will be chopping out a large portion of the front subframes in order to be able to fit the body onto the S10 frame. So all that extra hardware has to come out. So with that, we'll have a big giant open gap in the engine bay that we can then be able to further work around in order to fit our body in place. But that is not all. We're still going to have to get to the rear and remove the rear end. And of course, if you've seen Truckstang videos from the first car, you have to remove the entire rear end, leaf spring assembly, parking brakes, brake lines, all that stuff has to come out just leaving the rear subframe. And of course, just like with the first car, we have to put everything up on jack stands or blocks or whatever in order to get the body suspended enough to drop all that hardware down, and then be able to get our crane in place so we can jack the car up to get it on the drums and boards. So now, with everything done at that point, we can then begin to start doing some serious chopping on the rest of this body and get ready to put our S10 frame in place under the car and do the, I guess you could say, final chopping, because that's where we actually start hacking into the subframes and re-welding material in there to be able to merge the two components together. So we're going to go ahead, get a little bit more work done off camera, and continue on, and I will see you shortly. Stand by. All right, going off on a tangent, we went ahead and picked up the 306 cylinder engine that we had our eye on for this build. This thing came out of an 84 van, so this actually has a feedback carburetor and a computer controlled distributor, which we're not going to be using because, well, we're not going to go with all that garbage. We're going to go ahead and put a regular single barrel carburetor in place of that one, as well as a hybrid HEI distributor that's available for this engine, so we could simplify things. Also, it's got a cool air cleaner on here too that kind of has a low profile setup on it, but it's got everything we need on here. We've got our exhaust flange and everything, so we could weld right to that. We've got all our accessory brackets, even got the mounting point right here for an AC compressor whenever we get around to that. Fan, power steering pump. The good thing about these engines is because these big block 6-cylinders have the same bolt pattern as the small block Ford V8s, all the transmissions and the hardware bolt right up. So we have us a C4 transmission that came off of one of the V8s in the garage, along with the flywheel and the little adapter plate that goes in the middle there. Well, not an adapter plate, just a spacer. We bolted all that garbage up, so we have the entire power plant ready to go. Next move is going to be to jack this thing up and mount it in the frame here, because it would be good to have this thing situated in the frame before we start fitting everything, because it'll at least let us know where we need to actually make cuts, whether it's on the subframe or even if we have to do any kind of modification to the firewall. Once we get this thing mounted, we can go ahead and actually start fitting the body onto the frame, which is going to start off with chopping off a section of the front subframe rails right over the upper control arms on the truck frame, so we can get that point mounted down first. And once we get all that situated well enough to where we can not cut any more metal out, then we can go ahead and start looking at how we're going to attach all that stuff. And then once we at least get it established, we're not going to fully mount everything because we still have to get the rear situated just as well. Once we get the rear frame rails situated and cut and all that, we could then do the final mounting of the body onto the frame, as far as any kind of welding or brackets or bolt ups or whatever, so we can get this body fully mated to the truck frame around the engine, so we don't have to do any kind of guesswork that might cause us to have to go back later on if we were to mount the engine after the fact. So with that, going ahead, get our work finished up on all that, and we're going to move on to the next phase of the project. All right, we got all our body mounting done. We literally have 6 different points that we've anchored everything on here. We've got 2 different sets in the engine bay. We've got 2 different sets in the cab area and 2 different sets in the trunk / soon to be pickup bed area. Take a quick look in the engine bay area. The 2 points we have are right next to each other. This old sway bar bracket was used as the first mounting point, where I just drilled into this super thick top of the truck frame and tapped it for grade 8 3/8 bolts. Right here I used a heavy duty angle brace that I welded to the top of the truck frame and drove bolts all the way through the subframe in order to attach it to the subframe of the body, so everything is still removable if we so desired. Go to the cab area. In the cab area, same kind of thing. I used heavy duty angle brace and a section of the old subframe rail, which is surprisingly thick given the fact that this stuff rusts away pretty quick. But welded the subframe metal to the angle bracket, welded the angle bracket to the top of the truck frame, and drilled holes through the frame rail right here to secure with a couple of nuts and bolts. Same thing on that side over there. And then as for the back side of the cab area, took a piece of angle iron after I lowered the body back down from chopping out the section of subframe right there where it connects to the torque box. The thing is now resting on the torque box. Well, the torque box is resting on top of the frame. Also, that bracket right there for the truck frame that would have held the old bed for this frame served as a perfect spot to put the angle iron, which actually, if we look right here, it actually sits on top of the remnants of the torque box as well as that truck frame bracket. So all of that worked out. I even welded an extra piece of angle iron right here to connect between the main angle iron and the back of this torque box metal, and of course drilled a hole through this to put a nut and bolt to connect it to that bracket on the truck frame. Same thing on that side. Now to the trunk area. This little spot right here, using a piece of heavy plate steel, also welded to the side of the truck frame right here, and what's left of the subframe right here after I hacked it away in the front there by the torque box, I went ahead and put probably a 7/16 bolt, but that's going through the subframe with a nut and bolt to hold this plate to the subframe here to help secure the body, while this is obviously welded to the truck frame. Then, if I go over here, but look first here, another bracket that I made. You know what? Let me go into the trunk area. Hold on. Yeah, looking at this area right here, this is another angle brace with a large piece of steel right here, super heavy duty stuff, all welded together, and it's welded to the back here on the truck frame, and the mounting point, the bushing point for the leaf springs, served as an anchor point using some 1/2 inch bolts going through our improvised mountain bracket. So there's a very minor cushioning ability because there's still a bushing in both of these anchor points for the old leaf spring. So this here is holding that down. Same thing right there. Heavy duty crap. The extra plate steel I had, instead of just chopping it all the way off, I ground it down enough to where I could knock it down perpendicular to the rest of this 90-degree angle and welded it back up. So this will actually serve as a good anchor point for any extra metal I'll put in here to reinforce this whole area for when we put our truck bed metal on here, because all this is going to have to be super strong and heavy duty if I actually want to be able to use this thing like a truck. I mean, if you're going to throw an engine in here, you got to be able to support 500 pounds of weight on here, and some conduit is not going to be enough. I'm going to really have to beef this whole area up. But all in all, like I say, 6 different anchor points, front to back, back to front. This body is pretty much on the frame, ready to rock and roll. So we're going to cut it off here because, well, as you can see, there's a lot more crap we got to do on this thing. We're going to have to build out the floors and the side panels for the bed area, and I still got to cut out the windshield area so I could do that, get that all set up. There's a lot more stuff to do. Mounting the body was just a fragment of the project. So until the next time, as usual, like, subscribe, notifications, TikTok, website, all that good stuff. Stay tuned for more of this pile right here, because the next time this thing will be coming together even more so. So we'll catch you later.